High is your problem now. My in-laws sneered before turning their backs on my comatose husband to catch a first-class flight to France. They abandoned me in a sterile hospital room, leaving me to shoulder the unbearable weight of a tragedy they secretly orchestrated. But the exact second their private plane took off, my supposedly brain-dead husband opened his eyes, grabbed my wrist, and whispered a truth that would destroy their entire billionaire empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who severely underestimated your worth. My name is Camille. I am 31 years old and a forensic accountant. I grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Atlanta, learning early on that survival requires sharp eyes and a sharper mind. My husband Julian is 34 years old and the CEO of Sterling Logistics, a massive transportation empire founded by his grandfather. Our worlds collided, and against his family's rigid expectations, we fell deeply in love. The VIP suite at Atlanta Memorial Hospital felt more like a luxury penthouse than a place of healing, but the rhythmic hissing of the ventilator grounded me in the nightmare. Julian lay motionless on the crisp white sheets. The monitors beeped in a slow, agonizing tempo. The doctors had told me it was a sudden, massive stroke. They claimed his brain activity had ceased. I stood by his bedside, holding his cold hand, my heart shattering into a million pieces. But I was not allowed to grieve in peace. The heavy mahogany door swung open, and my mother-in-law Vivian stepped into the room, bringing with her the suffocating scent of expensive floral perfume and absolute disdain. She was 58 years old, dripping in diamonds, and wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my college tuition. Behind her stood my father-in-law Reginald, the 62-year-old chairman of the board. He possessed a cold, calculating demeanor that always made my skin crawl. They did not rush to their son's side. They did not shed a single tear. Instead, Vivian crossed her arms and looked at me with a sneer that twisted her perfectly contoured face. "You really thought you hit the jackpot when you manipulated my son into marrying you," Vivian said, her voice dripping with venom. "You thought you could just waltz into the Sterling family, a little nobody with a calculator, and live out your high society fantasies." I kept my eyes fixed on Julian, refusing to let her see how her words stung. "Vivian, your son is lying here fighting for his life," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Can we please just focus on him?" Reginald scoffed, adjusting his silk tie. "There is no fighting, Camille. The doctors have made it abundantly clear. Julian is brain dead. He is gone. Now we have to deal with the mess he left behind, and more importantly, the mess you represent." Vivian stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. "I remember the day Julian brought you to the country club," she said, pacing around the life support machinery. "You wore a discount rack dress and looked at our world like a starving child looking through a bakery window. We sent Julian to Morehouse. We groomed him to lead the Atlanta elite. We introduced him to women who understood the weight of the Sterling legacy. But he insisted on playing savior to a charity case. He rebelled against us by choosing you. And what has your working-class grit done for him now? Nothing. Your meal ticket is hooked up to a machine and you are stuck here to change his feeding tubes." I gritted my teeth. "I married Julian because I love him. I never cared about your money or your elitist social clubs." Vivian let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Love does not pay the medical bills for a private VIP suite, my dear. And speaking of bills, we have some business to conclude." The door opened again. My sister-in-law Jada strutted in, dragging a Louis Vuitton suitcase behind her. At 30 years old, she was the family princess, arrogant, completely dependent on the family wealth, and fiercely jealous of anyone who commanded Julian's attention. Right beside her was her husband Terrence. He was 33, the chief financial officer of Sterling Logistics, and a man whose tailored suits never quite hid his shady, arrogant nature. Terrence flashed a brilliant, entirely fake smile as he pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his leather briefcase. "We cannot stay long," Jada announced, checking her reflection in the dark screen of a medical monitor. "Our flight to Paris boards in 2 hours. I have Fashion Week fittings I simply cannot miss." Paris. I stared at her in utter disbelief. Your brother is on life support and you are going to Paris. Life moves on, Camille Terrence interjected smoothly. And unfortunately, so do the financial obligations. He slapped the stack of papers onto the small table next to Julian's bed and handed me a pen. This is a medical and financial liability waiver. You need to sign it right now. I frowned, my forensic accountant instincts immediately flaring up. What exactly am I signing? I demanded. Reginald stepped forward, his tone leaving no room for argument. The Sterling Family Trust has been temporarily frozen due to the sudden shift in corporate leadership. We are transitioning power to Terrence to ensure the company remains stable. Because the trust is frozen, all of Julian's current and future medical expenses will fall directly on his next of kin. That is you, Camille. You are his wife. This document simply formalizes that you accept sole responsibility for his care and his debts. You see, Camille, this city runs on influence, Reginald added, smoothing the lapels of his designer jacket. When we leave this room, the narrative belongs to us. We will attend our events in Paris. We will mourn our tragic loss with our peers. Everyone will offer their condolences to the grieving parents. And you will be the footnote, the tragic, overwhelmed widow who simply could not handle the pressure. If you try to speak out, if you try to claim we abandoned him, my lawyers will crush you before you can even reach a microphone. We own the truth here. You are cutting him off, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as the sheer cruelty of their plan washed over me. You are abandoning your own son and leaving me to shoulder millions of dollars in medical debt. Vivian smiled, a chilling expression completely devoid of maternal warmth. He chose you over his family, Camille. We warned him that marrying beneath his station would have consequences. Now, you get to experience the reality of your choices. He is your problem now. Terrence tapped the paper impatiently. Sign it, Camille, or we instruct the hospital administration to pull the plug today. They are on our payroll, remember. They will do whatever Reginald says. You have no money, no power, and no options. Sign the paper. My hands shook as I picked up the pen. I looked at Julian's still face, my heart breaking for the man who had loved his family so fiercely, only to be discarded the moment he became an inconvenience. As the ink dried on the page, I felt an overwhelming wave of isolation. I had spent years analyzing fraudulent accounts, tracing hidden assets, and exposing corporate liars. I was trained to find the truth in numbers. Yet here in this cold hospital room, no amount of forensic accounting could save my husband from his own flesh and blood. The reality of my situation crashed down upon me. I was entirely at their mercy, trapped in a legal and financial cage they had meticulously built. With tears blurring my vision, I scrawled my signature across the bottom of the page, binding myself to a mountain of debt just to keep the machines breathing for my husband. Terrence snatched the paper back, his triumphant smirk, making my stomach churn. Excellent, he said, slipping it into his briefcase. Have fun playing Nurse Camille. Jada let out a high-pitched giggle, linking her arm through Terrence's. Ciao, Camille. Try not to drown in the hospital bills. Vivian and Reginald did not even offer a parting glance at their son. They turned their backs on him with absolute indifference, marching out of the room with Terrence and Jada right behind them. Their laughter echoed down the pristine hospital hallway, a cruel soundtrack to the darkest moment of my life. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing me inside the suffocating quiet of the room. I collapsed into the chair beside Julian's bed, burying my face in my hands. The tears I had fought so hard to hold back finally spilled over. I was completely alone. I had no financial resources to fight them, no family support system in their elite circles, and the man who had been my entire world was slipping away. I rested my forehead against Julian's arm, sobbing quietly into the sterile hospital blanket. I am so sorry, Julian, I whispered, my voice cracking. I am so sorry they did this to you. Then something impossible happened. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor suddenly skipped a beat. It stuttered, the tempo shifting rapidly. I lifted my head, wiping my eyes, staring at the screen in confusion. Before I could call out for a nurse, I felt a sudden weak pressure on my forearm. I gasped, looking down. Julian's fingers, which had been limp and lifeless just seconds ago, were curling around my wrist. His grip was incredibly weak, trembling with exertion, but it was deliberate. It was real. My breath caught in my throat. Julian, I breathed out, leaning closer. His eyelids fluttered. The struggle was etched across every line of his pale face as he fought against an invisible weight. Slowly, agonizingly, his eyes opened. The bright, intelligent brown eyes I loved so much were clouded with exhaustion and raw panic. He was not brain dead. He was in there, trapped inside his own body. Julian, oh my God, you are awake. I reached for the call button, ready to scream for help. I have to get the doctors. No. The word was barely a rasp of air, rough and broken, but the urgency in his tone froze my hand in mid-air. His eyes darted toward the door, filled with stark terror. Do not call them. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. What are you talking about? What happened to you? Julian swallowed hard, his jaw trembling as he forced his paralyzed vocal cords to work. It was not a stroke. He wheezed, his fingers tightening around my wrist with a desperate warning pressure. It was Terrence. He poisoned me. You have to get me out of here, Camille. Run, before they come back. The sheer horror of his words paralyzed me for a fraction of a second. Poisoned. My husband had been lying here, fully conscious, trapped inside his own unresponsive body, while his family casually discussed his murder and planned their Parisian vacation. I stared at his pale, sweating face, my mind racing to process the absolute magnitude of the betrayal. How is this even possible? I asked, my voice shaking as I leaned in close so no one outside the heavy mahogany door could hear us. What did Terrence use on you to cause this sudden, terrifying paralysis? I asked. A neurotoxin, Julian gasped, each syllable requiring a monumental physical effort. His chest heaved as he fought to pull air into his recovering lungs. It was a rare paralytic variant, hard to trace in standard blood panels. It mimics a massive brainstem stroke perfectly. I could hear everything, Camille. Every single word they said since I collapsed in the study. A single tear rolled down his cheek, landing on the stark white hospital pillowcase. I confronted them. He continued, his breathing, shallow and rapid, his eyes wide with remembered panic. I found the discrepancies in the financial ledgers. $50 million vanished from the Sterling Logistics operational accounts last week. They routed the stolen capital through offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands. As a forensic accountant, the numbers immediately made brutal sense to my trained mind. The recent corporate budget cuts the sudden shift in our logistics vendors, Terrence aggressively blocking my access to the internal audit reports last month. It all aligned perfectly into a massive web of corporate fraud. I confronted Terrence in his study 2 nights ago. Julian explained, his voice growing incredibly weak as the exertion took its toll on his recovering muscles. I told him I was going straight to the board of directors and then to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He poured me a glass of aged bourbon. He said we should drink to the bitter end of his career. I took a single sip. Within seconds, my legs completely gave out beneath me. I collapsed on the expensive Persian rug. I could not move a single muscle, but my eyes were wide open. My hearing was perfectly sharp. I squeezed his hand, completely sickened by the horrifying image of his paralysis. And your parents, I prompted, gently, crying softly. They walked into the study 10 minutes later. Julian rasped, his expression hardening into pure, unadulterated grief. Terrence told my father about the $50 million. My father did not call an ambulance to save me. He looked down at my paralyzed body on the floor and told Terrence they had to protect the family legacy at all costs. A public embezzlement scandal would tank the company's stock and completely ruin our social standing among the elite families in Atlanta. My mother agreed without hesitation. She said a tragic medical emergency would garner public sympathy for our great business family, while a federal indictment would bring unforgivable shame to the Sterling name. They chose their country club reputation over my own life. Before I could respond to the sheer horrifying depravity of his parents, the distinct sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the quiet corridor outside our private VIP suite. Julian's eyes widened in sheer terror. His heart monitor began to beep faster, the rising tempo threatening to alert the main nurses stationed down the hall. Calm down, I whispered urgently, pressing my hand gently against his chest to ground him. I will not let them hurt you ever again. I promise. I crept silently toward the heavy hospital door and cracked it open just a tiny fraction of an inch to peer outside. Down the pristine, brightly lit hallway, Dr. Aris was approaching with determined steps. He was the chief of medicine at Atlanta Memorial Hospital, and more importantly, Reginald's longtime corporate golfing partner. I watched in absolute horror as he paused outside the medical supply room. He pulled a syringe from his white lab coat pocket, flicked it with his thumb, and carefully checked the clear liquid dosage. My blood ran completely cold inside my pulsing blue veins. This was not a routine medical checkup or a standard evening round. This was the final lethal dose. Reginald and Vivian had undoubtedly ordered Dr. Aris to finish the job before their private flight landed in Paris, ensuring Julian would suffer a fatal cardiac arrest, so the hospital could issue a clean, unquestionable death certificate. "We have less than 2 minutes," I said, rushing back to Julian's bedside. Dr. Aris is coming down the hall with a syringe. Julian tried to sit up, but his muscles were still heavily compromised by the paralytic toxin currently in his nervous system. He collapsed back against the mattress, his breathing ragged and desperate. "Go, Camille," he urged, his voice filled with overwhelming despair. "Save yourself. They will kill you too if they find you here." "I am not leaving you behind," I declared fiercely. My forensic accountant, brain shifting entirely out of grief and straight into tactical survival mode. I needed a distraction, something massive enough to pull the chief of medicine and the entire nursing staff away from this specific wing of the hospital. I slipped out of the room, keeping my back pressed flat against the cool white corridor wall. 2 doors down, another VIP suite was entirely empty, currently undergoing minor renovations. I slipped inside the dark room and locked the door behind me. I quickly scanned the space and spotted the central oxygen supply valve mounted on the far wall. I knew from basic hospital safety protocols that tampering with the main pressure line would trigger an immediate, system-wide code blue emergency alert for the entire floor. I grabbed a heavy metal wrench left behind by a careless maintenance worker, took a deep breath and smashed it violently against the oxygen regulator. A loud, aggressive hiss sounded quickly. The pressurized gas quickly escaped into the air. Instantly, the blaring, high-pitched wail of the emergency alarm echoed through the corridors. Bright red strobe lights flashed frantically from the ceiling. Over the hospital intercom, a robotic voice announced a critical pressure failure in the East Wing, ordering all available medical personnel to respond. I peeked through the small glass window of the door. Absolute chaos erupted outside. Nurses sprinted past Julian's room, rushing blindly toward the source of the blaring alarm. Dr. Aris cursed loudly, shoving the deadly syringe back into his pocket and running in the opposite direction. He needed to coordinate the sudden emergency response. The desperate distraction worked perfectly. I darted back into Julian's room and went straight for the complex medical equipment keeping up the facade of his impending death. I ripped the intravenous lines directly from his arm, pressing a piece of sterile gauze against the puncture wounds to stop the sudden bleeding. I disconnected the heart monitor, silencing the machine before it could register the sudden drop in his vitals and alert the front desk. "We need to move right now," I commanded, pulling his heavy arm over my shoulder and lifting his body. Outside in the hallway, a metal janitor cart had been abandoned during the sudden panic. I grabbed the spare oversized navy blue uniform draped over the handle and shoved it quickly into the room. I pulled the thick janitor shirt over Julian's standard hospital gown, effectively hiding his identity from any passing staff. I jammed a worn baseball cap onto his head, pulling the stiff brim low to obscure his recognizable face. He was practically dead weight. Dragging a fully grown man whose muscles were still recovering from a potent neurotoxin was the hardest physical challenge of my entire life. My arm muscles burned with exhaustion, and my lungs screamed for air, but raw adrenaline fueled my every single step. We stumbled clumsily out of the VIP suite and completely avoided the main corridor, taking the narrow, dimly lit service hallway toward the large freight elevator typically used for medical waste and dirty laundry. The metal elevator doors chimed open. We stepped inside the empty cabin, and I slammed my fist against the basement button. The slow descent felt like an agonizing eternity. Julian leaned heavily against the cold metal wall, his breathing shallow, his face exceptionally pale and sweating profusely. "Stay with me, Julian," I pleaded, gripping his cold hand tightly to keep him fully conscious. The doors finally opened to the underground hospital loading dock. A massive commercial laundry van was parked near the exit doors, its engine loudly idling, while the driver stood outside smoking a cigarette. This was our only chance for freedom. I supported Julian's weight, sneaking behind the dumpsters. I shoved him into the passenger seat, jumped behind the steering wheel, and slammed the gas pedal down hard. We burst out into the cool Atlanta night, just as Dr. Eris realized his murder plot failed. I gripped the steering wheel of the stolen laundry van so tightly, my knuckles turned completely white, accelerating into the night, just as Dr. Eris realized his murder plot failed. The heavy vehicle barreled through the rain-slicked streets of downtown Atlanta, putting as much distance as possible between us and the corrupt medical staff at the hospital. Beside me, Julian slumped heavily against the passenger door. His breathing was dangerously shallow, and the lingering effects of Terrence's neurotoxin left his muscles practically useless. I navigated through the labyrinth of back roads, deliberately avoiding the major highways to evade capture. I needed a sanctuary immediately. I needed a place so far removed from the glittering high society world of the Sterling family that they would never even think to search there. 30 minutes later, I pulled the stolen van into the cracked, weed-infested parking lot of the Starlight Inn. It was a rundown cash-only motel located on the gritty industrial outskirts of the city. The neon sign buzzed loudly, half of its letters burnt out entirely. The parking lot was littered with broken glass. Vivian and Reginald Sterling would rather die than step foot in this filthy place. It was the perfect hiding spot. I left Julian hidden in the dark cab of the van while I marched into the grimy lobby. I slapped a wad of emergency cash on the scratched plexiglass counter, securing a room at the very back of the property under a fake name. Getting Julian inside was a monumental physical struggle. I draped his heavy arm over my shoulders, supporting his dead weight as we stumbled through the damp, humid night air. We pushed through the flimsy wooden door of room 104. The space smelled strongly of stale cigarette smoke. The carpet was stained, and the floral bedspread looked decades old. I gently lowered Julian onto the lumpy mattress. He groaned softly, his chest rising and falling with agonizing effort. The burden of our survival rested entirely on my shoulders now. Julian had the corporate knowledge, but his body was completely broken. If we were going to survive the night and take down the people who tried to murder him, I had to become the weapon. I checked the rusty deadbolt on the door and jammed a heavy wooden chair tightly under the metal handle for extra security and peace. I pulled the heavy blackout curtains tightly shut, plunging the dingy motel room into deep shadow. I grabbed my leather tote bag, the only possession I had managed to secure from the hospital room before our desperate escape. Inside rested my high-powered laptop and a specialized decryption drive I used for forensic accounting audits. I set up my makeshift workstation on the wobbly particle board desk in the corner. I connected to the unstable motel internet using 3 different virtual private networks to mask our digital footprint. I needed to access Julian's encrypted backup server before Terrence destroyed the files. Julian weakly turned his head on the flat pillow, watching me with feverish eyes. "The master password is the date we met," he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible over the rattling air conditioning unit in the dirty window. I typed the sequence quickly. A progress bar flashed across the screen, verifying the heavy encryption keys. A few agonizing seconds later, the secure corporate server dashboard materialized before my eyes. My fingers flew rapidly across the black keyboard. I am a forensic accountant. I do not see numbers as abstract concepts. I see them as clear footprints in the mud. These numerical footprints trailed directly back to the criminals who tried to hide them. Terrence thought he was a financial genius, but he was nothing but a sloppy, arrogant thief wearing a custom-tailored suit. I began tearing through the hidden financial layers of Terrence's supposedly secure offshore accounts. I isolated the primary ledger for Sterling Logistics and ran a rapid comparative analysis against the shadow accounts Julian had warned me about. The screen flooded with unauthorized wire transfers, inflated vendor invoices, and massive capital bleeds. Terrence had created an elaborate labyrinth of shell companies to funnel the stolen cash. I moved $50 million out of Atlanta using fake supply chain contracts to justify the massive corporate expenditures. But Terrence made a fatal flaw. He reused the same numerical sequencing algorithms for his fraudulent invoices. He lacked absolute creativity. I started mapping the illicit money flow, tracing every single stolen dollar back to its corrupted source. The silence of the motel room was suddenly shattered by the sharp, jarring ring of my cell phone. The harsh sound made me jump, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I stared at the bright screen displaying a highly familiar phone number. The caller identification displayed Jada's name. My arrogant, malicious sister-in-law was calling me. She was supposed to be on a luxury flight to Paris with Terrence, Vivian, and Reginald. I looked over at Julian. He gave me a weak, terrifying nod. I grabbed my digital tracing cable, swiftly connecting my cell phone to my laptop. I launched a specialized tracking software program I utilized during hostile corporate audits. I needed to know exactly where they were located right now. I took a deep breath, schooling my features into an expression of pure panic, and accepted the incoming call. Camille Jada purred into the receiver. Her voice was absolutely dripping with cruel, undeniable satisfaction. I could hear the clinking of expensive champagne glasses and the low hum of a private jet engine in the background. They were currently on their layover, basking in the glory of their perceived victory. I hope you are enjoying your new reality, Camille. I just thought I would call to deliver some fantastic news. I just contacted the bank. I completely froze every single one of your joint bank accounts. You have absolutely zero access to the vast Sterling family wealth and corporate assets. Your credit cards will decline. Your savings are entirely locked. You are completely and utterly destitute. I forced a loud, desperate sob into the microphone. I channeled every ounce of fear and exhaustion I felt into a brilliant theatrical performance. Jada, please, I begged, letting my voice crack with fabricated despair. You cannot do this to me. Julian is lying here in the hospital. I have no way to pay for anything. How am I supposed to survive? Please, you have to unfreeze the accounts. I need help. My acting was flawless. Jada laughed, a sharp, piercing, truly evil sound. Her massive ego was blinding her to the trap I was actively setting. As she continued to gloat, my eyes remained locked on my laptop screen. The tracking software was rapidly pinging cellular towers, working tirelessly to pinpoint her exact geographical coordinates. You should have thought about your survival before you married my brother, Jada taunted viciously. You never belonged in our world. Camille, you are just a pathetic gold digger from the south side of Atlanta. You thought you could secure a lifetime of luxury by trapping Julian. Well, Julian is gone now. He is a vegetable hooked up. And you are nothing. By the end of this week, you will be thrown out onto the cold streets. You will be entirely homeless, sleeping in a gutter where you belong. Mom and Dad are going to make sure you never find employment in this city ever again. We are going to completely crush you. The tracking program locked onto a strong signal. A bright red dot materialized on the digital map displayed on my monitor. Charles de Gaulle Airport, First Class VIP Lounge, Paris, France. I had her exact IP address locked and loaded in my secure digital database. I quickly deployed a subtle aggressive malware packet directly through the cellular connection. The malicious code silently slipped into Jada's smartphone, granting me unrestricted backdoor access to her personal emails, text messages, and private financial applications. She was so busy insulting my upbringing that she completely failed to realize she had just handed me the master keys to her entire digital life. Oh, Jada, I cried out, making sure to sound thoroughly broken and defeated. What am I going to do? I have nothing left. Please do not take everything from me. I will gladly sign whatever documents you want. Just give me enough money to live. Jada sighed heavily, feigning absolute boredom with my desperate pleading. You are so pathetic, Camille. It is honestly embarrassing. Enjoy your miserable, poverty-stricken life. Do not ever try to contact my family again. You are entirely dead to us. The call disconnected abruptly. The dial tone buzzed loudly in my ear. I lowered the phone from my face, and the desperate, sobbing expression instantly vanished from my features. A cold, ruthless smile spread slowly across my lips. I turned back to my laptop screen, watching the stolen data from Jada flood in. The downloaded data from Jada's phone cascaded across my dark screen like a digital waterfall. Her arrogant assumption of victory had just handed me the master administrative credentials to the Sterling Logistics secure corporate network. I cracked my knuckles, ignoring the fierce exhaustion burning behind my eyes, and launched a direct assault on the company firewall. With her executive-level access, the primary security barriers folded instantly. I bypassed the standard employee portals and dug straight into the encrypted shadow ledgers Julian had warned me about. As a forensic accountant, I had unraveled massive corporate frauds before, but what I uncovered in those hidden digital vaults made my blood run cold. This was not simple family greed. Terrence and Reginald were not just skimming profits to fund their lavish country club lifestyles. I opened a sequence of restricted shipping manifests, labeled under a fake subsidiary corporation, in the Cayman Islands. I cross-referenced those freight logs with the missing $50 million. The numbers aligned with terrifying mathematical precision. They were using the massive Sterling Logistics trucking fleet to move heavy, untraceable cargo across state lines. The cargo manifests listed agricultural supplies, but the weight distributions and offshore payment routing painted a sinister picture. Terrence was laundering dirty money for a massive underground weapons syndicate. The $50 million Julian had discovered was not embezzled corporate profit. It was the cartel's freshly washed cash, sitting in a holding account, waiting for distribution. Reginald had effectively turned his own father's legitimate, respected transportation empire into a highly organized criminal enterprise. Julian had stumbled right into the middle of an international gun-running operation. No wonder they tried to murder him so quickly. He was a fatal liability to a highly organized, dangerous cartel that brutally executed anyone who dared to compromise their deadly, lucrative operations. I turned to look at Julian. He was shivering under the thin motel blanket, his breathing still shallow but stabilizing. We were not just fighting a family of greedy narcissists. We were at war with highly organized, heavily armed criminals. I downloaded every single shipping manifest, offshore bank statement, and illicit communication log onto my encrypted flash drive. I needed irrefutable proof to destroy them. Suddenly, my intercepted feed of Jada's text messages lit up with frantic, terrifying activity. The smug Parisian celebration had just turned into absolute chaos. Dr. Aris had finally called Terrence to report the catastrophic failure at the hospital. The message from Terrence to Reginald appeared on my screen, typed in desperate rapid-fire keystrokes. Julian is gone. The bed is completely empty. The security cameras in the loading dock show a stolen laundry van. Camille took him. I watched the digital panic unfold in real time. Jada sent a rapid string of terrified messages to her husband, frantically asking if they were going to spend their lives in federal prison. Terrence replied with a chilling single-sentence instruction. Keep your mouth shut, I am handling the liability right now. My advanced hacking software intercepted Terrence's next outbound communication. It was not to the Atlanta Police Department. It was an encrypted ping to a burner phone located deep in Mexico. He was contacting his ruthless cartel handlers. He sent them a digital file containing my driver's license photograph, my full name, and the license plate number of my personal vehicle. Terrence was putting a massive lethal bounty directly on my head. He told the syndicate that the rogue accountant wife had stolen the $50 million ledger and kidnapped the dying CEO. He authorized a blank check for my execution. We were no longer just running from a corrupt family. We were being hunted by highly trained, merciless cartel hitmen who operated completely outside the boundaries of the law. My heart slammed violently against my ribcage. I needed to move Julian again, but he was barely strong enough to keep his eyes open. The flickering glow of the old television mounted in the corner of our dingy motel room suddenly caught my attention. I had left the volume muted, but the breaking news banner flashing across the bottom of the screen made my stomach drop into a bottomless abyss. A photo of my face was plastered next to a picture of Julian. I grabbed the sticky television remote and quickly unmuted the device. A severe-looking news anchor stared directly into the camera, delivering a sensationalized report to the city of Atlanta. The anchor announced that a massive citywide manhunt was currently underway for Camille Sterling. The screen shifted to a live press conference taking place outside the pristine gates of the Atlanta Memorial Hospital. Vivian and Reginald stood before a massive cluster of reporters and news cameras. Vivian was delivering the performance of her entire life. She clutched a lace handkerchief, sobbing hysterically while leaning against her corrupt husband for dramatic support. My beautiful son was fighting for his very life. Vivian cried out to the flashing cameras, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured agony. He was in a delicate coma. He needed his family. But his greedy, unstable wife completely lost her mind. She realized she was not going to inherit our family wealth, so she disconnected him from his life-saving medical equipment and abducted him in the middle of the night. She is extorting us. She is demanding a massive ransom to return my dying boy. Please, if anyone sees her, call the authorities immediately. She is dangerous and unwell. Reginald stepped up to the microphone, projecting the image of a strong, grieving father. We have issued a formal public warrant for her immediate arrest, he declared, his voice echoing with false authority. We are offering a cash reward for any information leading to her capture and the safe return of our beloved son. We are working closely with law enforcement to bring this deranged woman to justice. Do not approach her under any circumstances. She is desperate, unstable, and poses a severe threat to everyone around her. I muted the television, staring at the screen in disbelief. Their strategy was diabolical. They had effortlessly weaponized the local media and the corrupt police force against me. By branding me as an unstable kidnapper, they had completely discredited any future claims I might make about the poisoning or the embezzlement. If I walked into a police station right now, I would be thrown into a holding cell. The officers would hand Julian straight back to Reginald and Dr. Eris, who would happily finish the murder plot under the guise of tragic medical complications. We were trapped in a rapidly shrinking box. The cartel assassins were hunting us in the shadows, eager to collect Terrence's massive cash bounty. The local police were hunting us in the light, eager to please the wealthy and influential Sterling family. Every single highway, hotel, and hospital in the state of Georgia would be aggressively searching for my face. I looked down at the stolen laundry van parked outside the motel window. We could not use it anymore. The hospital security team had likely reported the theft, and the license plate was flagged in the police database. Camille Julian whispered softly from the bed. His voice was gaining a tiny fraction of its normal strength as his resilient body slowly processed the paralytic toxin out of his system. I walked over and sat gently on the edge of the lumpy mattress. He had watched the horrifying press conference on the television. His dark eyes were filled with a mixture of profound sorrow and burning anger. "They framed you," he stated, his jaw clenching tightly. "They will use the police to silence us both." I gently stroked his warm forehead. "They think I am just some helpless girl from the South Side," I replied, my voice steady and devoid of fear. "They think I am going to panic and surrender. But they clearly forgot who they are dealing with. I am a forensic accountant, Julian. I dismantle complex systems for a living. And right now, their entire corrupt empire is built on a highly unstable foundation of lies and stolen cartel cash." I stood up and grabbed my heavy leather tote bag. I pulled out a sharp hunting knife and swiftly cut my long, dark hair, altering my physical appearance to evade the immediate police search. I swapped my bright clothing for a dark hooded sweatshirt and a faded black baseball cap I found abandoned in the dusty motel closet. "If we stay here, we will die," I told him, extending my hand to help him sit up. "We have to abandon the van and move on foot through the industrial district. There is an old train yard 2 miles away. We can shelter in an abandoned cargo car until I figure out our next strategic move." Julian nodded, forcing himself upright, despite the tremendous pain racking his recovering muscles. I wrapped his arms securely around my shoulders, bracing my stance to support his considerable weight. We slipped out of the motel room into the damp darkness of the Atlanta night. The distant wail of police sirens echoed through the empty streets, a chilling reminder of the massive target painted firmly on my back. The Sterling family thought they had successfully destroyed me. They thought they had buried the truth under a mountain of fake tears and dirty money. But they had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They had left me alive. As I dragged my husband through the shadowy alleys, gripping the encrypted flash drive containing the absolute destruction of their corrupt legacy, I made a silent vow. I was going to tear down their billionaire empire brick by bloody brick. I was going to expose Reginald, Vivian, Terrence, and Jada to federal justice. They wanted a war. I was going to give them a massacre. The cold rain began to fall, masking our footsteps as we disappeared into the dangerous labyrinth of the city. We were hunted and vastly outnumbered, but we held the undeniable truth, and I was going to use it to burn their criminal syndicates straight to the ground. The deadly game had just shifted, and I was ready to play my winning hand against them all. We huddled in the rusted shell of an abandoned cargo train car as the pale morning light broke across the Atlanta skyline. The cold metal walls offered little comfort, but they provided temporary invisibility. I had ventured out briefly to a nearby convenience store, paying cash to buy 2 bottles of water, a prepaid burner phone, and a cheap digital tablet. As Julian rested his head against his knees, slowly regaining control of his motor functions, I powered on the tablet and connected to an unsecured wireless network. The screen illuminated immediately, assaulting my eyes with the morning news broadcast. Vivian Sterling was sitting under the bright studio lights of the most popular daytime talk show in Georgia. She wore a tailored black morning dress, her hair perfectly styled to convey the exact image of a grieving, elegant matriarch. She held a tissue to her face, dabbing at her dry eyes while the sympathetic host leaned in close. Vivian was executing a masterclass in social manipulation. She looked directly into the camera lens and delivered a performance designed to utterly destroy my professional and personal life. My family welcomed Camille with open arms. Vivian lied flawlessly, her voice trembling with calculated grief. We knew she came from a troubled lower-class background on the south side of the city, but Julian loved her. We tried to ignore her erratic behavior and her obsessive focus on our financial assets. But yesterday she completely snapped. She disconnected my dying son from his life support and dragged him away to extort us for ransom. She is a dangerous, greedy woman who used her accounting background to try and steal our legacy. Now she has stolen my boy. The talk show host offered comforting words, condemning my actions to millions of viewers. Within minutes, my face was plastered across the screen again, accompanied by bold red text, labeling me a corporate fraud and a kidnapper. Vivian weaponized her immense status among the Atlanta elite. My professional reputation was dragged through the mud and shattered into a million pieces. Every accounting firm, every corporate client, and every prominent social circle in the state now viewed me as a deranged criminal. I watched the broadcast end with Reginald announcing an increased cash reward for my capture. They were tightening the noose, relying on public outrage to flush us out. Julian grabbed my shoulder, his grip significantly stronger than the night before. "Do not listen to her," he said, his voice finding its familiar deep resonance. "She is trying to break your spirit. She knows I cannot walk into a local police precinct. Reginald has the local precinct commanders on his payroll. If I hand this encrypted flash drive to a city detective, it will disappear, and we will be quietly executed in a holding cell. We cannot fight them in the light, Julian. We need federal weight. We need someone completely immune to the Sterling family influence and their dirty money." I pulled the cheap burner phone from my jacket pocket. I needed someone from my past. Someone who understood the gritty reality of the South Side and possessed the authority to strike down a billionaire syndicate. I dialed the number. There was a tense silence on the other end. Camille Elijah finally responded, his tone laced with immediate urgency. "Your face is on every federal watch list in the Southeast region right now. The local authorities are claiming you kidnapped a comatose man. Tell me you are not foolish enough to call me from a traceable line." "It is a burner," I assured him. Elijah and I grew up together. Now he was a senior FBI agent investigating massive corporate fraud. He knew I was incapable of Vivian's malicious accusations. "I need your help, Elijah," I continued rapidly. "Julian is not comatose. He was poisoned by his brother-in-law, Terrence. The Sterling Logistics empire is laundering $50 million for an underground weapons syndicate. Reginald is covering the entire thing up to protect their social standing. I have the raw data. I have the offshore routing numbers, the fake shell companies, and the cargo manifests. I need to hand this encrypted flash drive directly to you." Another heavy pause stretched across the line. "If you are holding cartel financial data, you have a massive target on your back," Elijah warned. "The syndicate will not wait for the police to arrest you. They will send their own cleaners. I am sending a secure location to this number. Be there in 20 minutes. Come alone. The line went dead. I looked at Julian pulling the black baseball cap lower over his eyes. We have to move, I told him. I helped him to his feet. He was walking now, unsteady, but fueled by pure adrenaline and the burning desire to reclaim his life. We navigated through the rusted train yard and slipped into the bustling mid-morning crowds of the industrial district. The location Elijah sent was an old classic diner situated near the edge of the highway, a busy intersection where people constantly came and went. We approached the diner cautiously. I instructed Julian to wait in the narrow alleyway beside the building, hiding behind a large industrial dumpster. I cannot risk you being seen on security cameras, I explained, handing him the digital tablet for communication. I will go inside, locate Elijah, and hand over the flash drive. Stay completely out of sight. Julian nodded, leaning against the brick wall. Be careful, Camille. If anything feels wrong, you walk away. I pushed through the glass doors of the diner. The smell of fried food and stale coffee hit me instantly. The room was packed with truck drivers and local workers. I scanned the booths and spotted Elijah sitting in the far corner. He wore a plain gray jacket, his posture rigid and alert. I kept my head down, sliding into the booth opposite him. You look terrible, Camille, Elijah muttered, his eyes darting around the diner to monitor the entrances. I slipped the encrypted flash drive from my pocket and slid it across the sticky table under a paper napkin. The decryption key is my birthday, I whispered. You will find every single fraudulent transaction Terrence authorized. They are using the trucking routes to move massive amounts of highly illegal weapons. Elijah palmed the drive smoothly, slipping it into his jacket. The Bureau has been trying to crack this specific cartel network for 3 years, he said quietly. If these files prove the Sterling family involvement, I can secure federal indictments against Reginald and Terrence by tomorrow morning. Suddenly, the burner phone in my pocket vibrated wildly. I pulled it out. A text message from Julian illuminated the screen. Thugs at the front door. 2 SUVs just pulled up. They are cartel. My blood ran completely cold. The cartel had successfully tracked the brief cellular signal from my burner phone when I called Elijah. Terrence had unleashed his hitmen faster than I anticipated. I looked toward the front entrance of the diner. 4 heavily tattooed men wearing dark clothing pushed through the doors. Their eyes coldly scanned the crowded room, their hands resting ominously inside their jackets. They were not looking to arrest me. They were looking to eliminate me and recover the stolen data. We have company, I whispered to Elijah, my heart hammering furiously. 4 men at the entrance. They are syndicate cleaners. Elijah did not turn his head, maintaining his casual posture, while his hand slipped beneath the table to unholster his service weapon. Do not panic, he ordered softly. We exit through the kitchen doors. Move slowly. Before I could even slide out of the booth, one of the thugs locked eyes with me. He recognized my face despite the chopped hair and dark clothing. He shouted a command in Spanish, drawing his weapon in the middle of the crowded diner. Customers screamed, diving under their tables as the thugs advanced rapidly toward our corner booth. We were completely trapped. Then a sudden crash echoed from the alleyway outside the large diner window. The sound of shattered glass and a blaring car alarm ripped through the tense air. Julian had forced himself to walk out of the shadows. Despite the lingering poison tearing at his nervous system, he grabbed a heavy metal trash can and smashed it violently into the windshield of the cartel SUVs parked outside. The alarm wailed. The unexpected chaos distracted the thugs for a vital split second. Elijah flipped the dining table upward, creating a temporary barricade. Move now, he roared. I scrambled toward the swinging kitchen doors. I burst into the alleyway, grabbing Julian. We sprinted into the massive industrial district. The flash drive was secure. Our final retaliation against them had officially begun. The cold rain masked our escape as we navigated the maze of abandoned warehouses and rusted shipping containers. Julian leaned heavily against my shoulder, his breathing ragged but determined. The neurotoxin was fading, replaced by pure, unadulterated fury. We found temporary shelter inside a derelict manufacturing plant, taking cover behind a massive pile of discarded concrete blocks. I pulled my secondary burner phone from my jacket pocket, waiting for Elijah to establish a secure connection. My hands shook from the adrenaline of the diner ambush. but my mind remained incredibly sharp. 10 agonizing minutes passed before the encrypted device vibrated. I answered immediately. "Do you have the files?" I demanded, my voice echoing slightly in the vast empty warehouse. "I have them," Elijah replied, his tone grim and strictly professional. "The data is catastrophic, Camille. You handed me the entire financial blueprint of the syndicate. Terrence has been washing cartel money through the Sterling Logistics shipping routes for over a year. The offshore accounts, the fake vendors, it is all here." "Then issue the federal arrest warrants right now," I urged, gripping the phone tightly. "Send your tactical teams to Paris and arrest them at the airport. They sent hitmen to kill us in broad daylight, Elijah." "It is not that simple," Elijah countered, the frustration evident in his voice. "I am looking at spreadsheets, Camille. Brilliant, damning spreadsheets. But Reginald Sterling employs the most ruthless corporate defense attorneys in the country. If I present this digital data to a federal judge right now, their lawyers will argue that you manipulated the files. They will claim you are a disgruntled, unstable wife trying to frame her wealthy in-laws. They will bury us in endless litigation, and the cartel will quietly execute Terrence to protect their assets before he ever sees the inside of a courtroom." "What are you saying?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "I am saying digital proof is not enough for an indictment of this magnitude," Elijah explained. "We need the undeniable smoking gun. We need Terrence to legally bind himself to the cartel money in front of unimpeachable witnesses." I reviewed the corporate board minutes you hacked. Terrence is preparing to launch a massive initial public offering. He is trying to take Sterling Logistics public to legitimize the cartel cash permanently. We need him to sign those fraudulent IPO documents. The moment his pen touches that paper, he commits federal wire fraud and international money laundering on the record. "How do we make that happen?" I asked. "You need to find out exactly when and where he plans to sign those documents," Elijah instructed. "And the venue. Give me the time. I will have a federal tactical team ready to breach the location. But you have to flush them out, Camille. You have to make them arrogant enough to act quickly." The line disconnected. I looked at Julian, relaying the harsh reality of our situation. We needed to bait the trap. We needed to make the Sterling family feel so incredibly victorious that they would rush the corporate takeover without performing their standard legal due diligence. "I need to call your mother," I told Julian, my mind formulating a dangerous high-stakes strategy. "I need to make her believe she has completely won. I need her to gloat. Vivian cannot resist bragging when she thinks she holds all the power." Julian nodded, his dark eyes filled with absolute resolve. "Do it. Make her feel like a god. Let her arrogance dig her own grave." I dialed the international number for Vivian's primary mobile phone. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to spike, pushing tears into my eyes to alter the cadence of my voice. I channeled every ounce of the sheer terror I felt in the hospital room, every shred of exhaustion from the past 24 hours. I needed to deliver the performance of a lifetime. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Hello," Vivian answered, her voice dripping with extreme irritation. "Who is calling this number?" "Vivian," I gasped, letting out a loud, pathetic sob. "Please, you have to help me." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a cruel, triumphant laugh. "Well, well. The runaway bride calls home. How is life as a wanted fugitive, Camille? I assume you saw my television interview this morning. The entire city of Atlanta is currently hunting you down." I sobbed louder, clutching the phone with trembling fingers. "Please, Vivian," I begged, letting my voice crack with fabricated despair. "I have nothing left. Jada froze all the bank accounts. The police are looking everywhere. The cartel hitmen almost killed me at a diner. I cannot run anymore." "And what about my son?" Vivian demanded coldly. "Where is Julian? Did you dump his body in a ditch?" I forced a devastating wail into the receiver. "He is dead, Vivian. He succumbed to the poison an hour ago. His heart just stopped beating. I could not save him. I am so sorry. He is gone." I looked at Julian while I said the words. He stood perfectly still, watching my masterclass in manipulation with quiet awe. Vivian did not cry. She did not scream in maternal agony. Instead, I heard the distinct clinking of a crystal champagne flute. Oh, what a tragic end to a disappointing life. Vivian sighed dramatically, clearly relishing her absolute victory. "I told him you would be the death of him. Now I have to plan a high society funeral on top of everything else. You really are a nuisance, Camille." "Please, Vivian." I whimpered, sounding utterly broken and defeated. I will take the blame for the kidnapping. I will sign a full confession saying I took him from the hospital. I will disappear forever and never mention the embezzlement. Just please wire $10,000 to an offshore account so I can flee the country. I just need enough money to cross the border. Please, I am begging you. Vivian laughed again, a sharp, piercing sound of pure elitist malice. $10,000 for the woman who ruined my family. You are absolutely delusional, Camille. You are going to rot in a federal prison for murder, and I am going to sit in the front row of your trial, wearing designer couture. I am not giving you a single dime. You are entirely powerless. You cannot do this! I cried out, ramping up the fake panic. Terrence will ruin the company. He is working with the cartel. Terrence is saving this family! Vivian snapped arrogantly, completely taking the bait. Terrence stepped up when Julian proved to be weak. In fact, we are cutting our Paris trip short right now. We are flying back to Atlanta immediately. We are hosting a massive exclusive gala tomorrow night at the Grand Ballroom of the Legacy Hotel. The entire social elite of Georgia will be there. We are officially announcing Terrence as the new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Logistics, and he will sign the $500 million IPO launch right on the main stage. My eyes locked onto Julian. We had the exact time. We had the exact location. We had the weapon. You cannot let him sign those papers, I pleaded weakly, playing my part to the very end. The company will be destroyed. The company will thrive, Vivian boasted viciously. Tomorrow night we secure our billionaire status, permanently, and you will be hunting for scraps in a dumpster. Enjoy your miserable, pathetic demise, Camille. The call disconnected. I slowly lowered the burner phone. The tears instantly vanished from my eyes. The trembling in my hands stopped completely. A cold, ruthless smile spread across my face. I looked at my husband. The trap was set. Vivian had handed us the entire blueprint of their destruction purely out of her own massive ego. They are flying back today, I told Julian, my voice sharp and entirely focused. The gala is tomorrow night at the Legacy Hotel. Terrence is going to publicly sign the IPO documents on the main stage in front of hundreds of elite investors. It is a massive publicity stunt to cover up your supposed death and legitimize his hostile takeover. Julian stood up straighter, the news fueling his recovery. His jaw clenched tightly as he processed the sheer audacity of his parents. They are going to use my memorial to launch a cartel-funded IPO. They are going to smile and drink champagne while handing my grandfather's legacy over to a weapons syndicate. It is the perfect pressure cooker, I explained, pacing the concrete floor of the abandoned warehouse. Elijah said we needed Terrence to physically sign the fraudulent documents to secure the federal wire fraud indictment. If Terrence signs that paperwork on stage, he merges the cartel shell companies into the Sterling Logistics public offering. He commits international money laundering in front of hundreds of wealthy witnesses. The FBI can raid the ballroom and arrest all of them simultaneously. How do we guarantee Terrence actually signs the documents? Julian asked, his analytical CEO mind engaging with the tactical strategy. If he senses any police presence, or if he gets spooked by the cartel handlers, he might delay the launch. He will not delay it, I replied confidently. Terrence is arrogant, but he is also terrified of the syndicate. He needs to clean that $50 million immediately, or the cartel will execute him. The gala is his only way out. But we cannot just let the FBI handle it alone. Reginald has too many politicians in his pocket. If the feds just walk through the front door, Reginald might find a loophole or bribe a judge to delay the arrest warrants. Then what do we do? Julian asked. We crash the event, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. We walk right into the lion's den. I will infiltrate the hotel and hack the audio-visual system in the grand ballroom. I will project the hidden security footage and the offshore bank statements onto the main screens for every single investor to see. I will destroy their social standing permanently. I will force Terrence to panic and sign his own death warrant on stage. Julian stepped closer, his dark eyes burning with fierce determination. And what about me? He asked. I am a dead man walking. I reached out and grabbed the lapels of his borrowed jacket. You are going to be the grand finale, Julian. When Vivian and Reginald think they have won, when Terrence puts his pen to that paper, you are going to walk through the main doors of that ballroom. You are going to rise from the dead and reclaim your empire. We spent the next several hours mapping out our tactical infiltration. The Legacy Hotel was a fortress of elite security, but as a forensic accountant, I knew that every fortress had a blind spot. I had worked catering jobs during my college years to pay for my degree. I knew exactly how the service corridors, the kitchen entrances, and the staff rotations operated during massive high society galas. We needed a disguise, we needed precise timing, and we needed unwavering nerve. I contacted Elijah on the secure line and relayed the intelligence. The gala at the Legacy Hotel tomorrow night. Terrence signs the IPO on stage. Have your federal tactical teams ready to breach the perimeter on my exact signal. Understood, Elijah replied. I am securing the federal warrants right now, but Camille, you are walking into a room filled with cartel associates and corrupt security guards. If you get caught before you expose the documents, I cannot protect you. They will not catch me, I promised him. They think I am a terrified widow running for my life. They have no idea they just invited the Grim Reaper to their party. I ended the call and crushed the burner phone under my boot, destroying the tracking chip. I looked at Julian. The final countdown had begun. We had 24 hours to prepare for the ultimate confrontation. The Sterling family thought they had buried us. They thought they had secured their billionaire legacy with lies and poison. They were about to learn a brutal, unforgivable lesson. True power lies in the truth, and tomorrow night the truth was coming to collect its debts. The Legacy Hotel in downtown Atlanta was a towering monument to exorbitant wealth and absolute excess. The grand ballroom, boasting crystal chandeliers that cascaded from vaulted ceilings, was meticulously designed to impress the most ruthless power players in the city. Tonight, the sprawling venue was completely swarming with the Georgia elite. High-profile politicians, ruthless corporate investors, and wealthy socialites, draped in designer gowns, filled the lavishly decorated space. A string quartet played a hauntingly beautiful melody in the corner, masking the dark criminal reality of the event. The Sterling Logistics initial public offering launch was the social event of the entire season. Vivian had spared no expense, transforming the ballroom into a glorious shrine, honoring the Sterling family name while actively hiding their immense corruption. Outside the impenetrable fortress of the hotel, Julian sat hidden in the tinted back seat of a discreet black tactical vehicle. Elijah and his heavily armed federal agents surrounded him, monitoring the secure radio channels with absolute focus. Julian was fully dressed in his finest bespoke black suit, his physical strength significantly recovered after days of grueling rest. He watched the digital blueprint of the hotel on a glowing monitor, waiting for my precise signal to make his resurrection public. My own infiltration was a much more dangerous assignment. I relied entirely on the gritty resourcefulness of my working-class background. During my grueling college years, I had worked countless double shifts for Premier Catering, the exact company contracted for tonight's massive event. I knew the intricate layout of the hotel service corridors significantly better than the arrogant guests sipping expensive champagne in the main hall. I slipped through the damp alleyway behind the hotel kitchen, flashing a fake employee identification badge I had swiftly manufactured in the motel. The exhausted kitchen manager barely glanced at my face before handing me a crisp white button-down shirt, a black bow tie, and a heavy tray of crystal champagne flutes. I pulled my dark hair back into a tight, severe bun and adjusted the uncomfortable bow tie around my neck. I stepped through the heavy swinging doors of the kitchen and directly entered the glittering ballroom. The sheer opulence of the room hit me instantly, but I kept my eyes fixed on the polished marble floor. I moved with the invisible, practiced grace of a seasoned server. To the billionaires in this room, catering staff were simply human furniture. We were entirely invisible to them. That invisibility was my greatest tactical advantage. I navigated the crowded floor, perfectly balancing the heavy silver tray of champagne. The scent of expensive cologne and heavy perfume filled the air, nearly suffocating me. I glided past clusters of wealthy socialites who had ruthlessly mocked my background just a few weeks ago. I recognized Beatrice Montgomery, the president of the elite country club, laughing loudly with a prominent state senator. I heard fragments of their toxic gossip as I offered them fresh drinks. Vivian is so incredibly brave, Beatrice declared, taking a glass from my tray without even glancing at my face. To lose her beloved son to that deranged poor girl he married and still host this magnificent event. It truly shows the resilience of the Sterling bloodline. The senator nodded in solemn agreement, taking a sip of his drink. Terrence is the strong leader this company desperately needs right now. Julian was far too soft, too distracted by his charity case wife. Terrence will make us all incredibly wealthy tonight when this public offering goes live. My jaw clenched tightly, but I forced my facial expression to remain perfectly blank. I bowed my head respectfully and moved away from their circle. Their absolute ignorance fueled my burning desire for justice. They were willingly handing their massive fortunes over to a violent weapons syndicate completely blinded by their own elitist arrogance. I continued my calculated path through the ballroom, mapping the exact locations of the security personnel. The hotel guards were heavily armed, positioned strategically at every major exit. Terrence was taking zero chances with the cartel money tonight. My primary objective was the master audio-visual control room, located on a suspended balcony overlooking the main stage. The control room managed the massive light-emitting diode screens that spanned the entire back wall of the ballroom. I needed to splice my encrypted flash drive directly into the main feed before Terrence walked onto the stage to sign the fraudulent documents. I discarded my empty champagne tray on a secluded side table and slipped smoothly behind a heavy velvet curtain that concealed the employee stairwell. The back hallways of the Legacy Hotel were dimly lit and eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of the ballroom. I climbed the carpeted stairs rapidly, my soft-soled shoes making absolutely no sound against the floorboards. As I reached the second-floor landing, I heard the distinct, frantic sound of heavy footsteps echoing down the corridor. I immediately flattened myself against the dark wall, holding my breath and praying the shadows would conceal my presence. Terrence rounded the corner, his face slick with nervous sweat. He looked nothing like the confident, arrogant executive who had tormented me in the hospital room. I was holding a sleek mobile phone tightly against his ear, his voice dropping to a desperate, panicked whisper. "I told you the money is entirely clean," Terrence hissed into the phone, pacing frantically back and forth just 10 feet away from my hiding spot. "I am signing the final public offering release in 20 minutes. The holding accounts will clear immediately. Tell your boss the $50 million is fully secured. I handled the Julian problem permanently. I handled the wife. There are absolutely no more liabilities. Do not send anyone else to the hotel tonight. The police presence here is far too heavy to risk a physical confrontation." I recorded the entire conversation using a hidden microphone pinned discreetly beneath my catering uniform. Terrence was completely terrified. The syndicate handlers were clearly pressuring him, threatening his life if the public offering failed to legitimize their dirty money. He ran a trembling hand over his face, straightened his expensive silk tie, and ended the call abruptly. He took a deep, shuddering breath and walked away, heading toward the exclusive holding room to prepare for his grand entrance. The moment the corridor was completely empty, I sprinted toward the audio-visual control room. The heavy security door was secured by a digital keypad. I pulled a small, specialized decryption device from my pocket, a high-tech tool Elijah had provided during our brief meeting at the diner. I connected the device to the keypad. The tiny screen flashed rapidly for 3 agonizing seconds before the magnetic lock clicked open with a satisfying heavy thud. I slipped inside the dark, freezing control room and immediately slammed the heavy door shut behind me. I threw the manual deadbolt, locking the door securely from the inside so nobody could interrupt my mission. The room was lined with complex soundboards, heavy lighting rigs, and advanced digital broadcasting equipment. Through the large, soundproof glass window, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the grand ballroom directly below. The stage was meticulously set. A large mahogany podium rested in the center, flanked by towering, expensive floral arrangements. The massive screens currently displayed the pristine golden logo of Sterling Logistics. I approached the primary broadcasting terminal and inserted my encrypted flash drive into the main port. My fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard, aggressively overriding the hotel network security protocols. I swiftly bypassed the standard video loop and uploaded the hidden files directly into the primary presentation queue. I queued up the high-resolution security footage of Terrence slipping the lethal neurotoxin into Julian's bourbon glass. I painstakingly linked the video to the offshore banking ledgers displaying Reginald and Jada's authorized signatures next to the cartel routing numbers. I set the entire broadcast to a manual trigger on my mobile phone. With a single press of a button, the devastating truth would explode across the ballroom screens for everyone to witness. My burner phone vibrated aggressively in my pocket. A text message from Elijah illuminated the small, cracked screen. Federal tactical teams are in position at all exterior doors. We are waiting for your exact signal. Do not trigger the breach until the pen physically hits the paper. We need the actual signature for the federal wire fraud conviction to stick permanently in court. I typed back a swift, concise confirmation. I am securely locked inside the control room. The broadcast is fully queued and ready. Get Julian ready for his entrance. I stepped up to the soundproof glass window and looked down at the glittering sea of corrupt socialites and greedy investors. The string quartet suddenly stopped playing. The bright ballroom lights dimmed dramatically, casting a theatrical, expectant hush over the entire crowd. A blinding spotlight illuminated the main stage. Vivian Sterling walked out from the velvet wings, escorted tightly by Reginald. She wore a dramatic, expensive black gown, her posture perfectly stiff with rehearsed fabricated grief. The crowd erupted into thunderous, highly respectful applause. Vivian stepped up to the mahogany podium and slowly adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the massive audience, her eyes calculatingly scanning the very people she was about to completely betray. I pulled the remote trigger from my pocket, resting my thumb gently over the activation button. The trap was flawlessly set. The federal agents were waiting silently in the shadows. The supposedly dead husband was sitting patiently in the parking lot, fully prepared to reclaim his stolen empire. I watched Vivian raise a trembling manicured hand to her face, preparing to deliver the most devastatingly fake eulogy in the history of Atlanta high society. The final act of this deadly corporate war was about to begin, and I was going to fiercely enjoy every single second of their spectacular, inevitable destruction. The heavy silence in the grand ballroom was suddenly broken by the sharp, dramatic intake of breath from Vivian Sterling. She stood at the mahogany podium, gripping the smooth wooden edges with perfectly manicured hands that trembled with expertly rehearsed sorrow. The blinding spotlight washed over her expensive black morning gown, highlighting the diamond necklace that sparkled against her chest. She looked out at the sea of wealthy investors, corrupt politicians, and ignorant socialites, playing them all like a finely tuned instrument. Thank you all for gathering here tonight in our darkest hour. Vivian began, her voice echoing through the massive sound system. Her tone was a masterclass in fabricated grief, fragile yet projecting strength. We came together to honor the legacy of my beautiful, brilliant son, Julian. How is the absolute light of this family and the true visionary behind Sterling Logistics. She paused, reaching up to wipe a non-existent tear from her cheek. The crowd murmured in collective sympathy. Several women in the front row pressed silk tissues to their faces, completely captivated by the elaborate performance. But Julian was taken from us far too soon, Vivian continued, allowing a harsh edge of calculated anger to seep into her shaking voice. He was taken from us by his cruel, manipulative wife. She isolated him, manipulated his kind heart, and when she realized she could never truly belong in our world, she abandoned him in his most desperate moment of medical need. She ripped him away from the medical professionals who were fighting to save his life, purely to extort this family for a ransom. She stole my boy, and now he is gone forever. A collective gasp rippled across the opulent ballroom. I stood securely locked inside the dark audio-visual control room, gripping the edge of the broadcast console so tightly my fingers ached. The sheer audacity of her lies made my blood boil, but I maintained my absolute focus. I watched through the soundproof glass window as Beatrice Montgomery, the country club president, shook her head in visible disgust at the mention of my name. Vivian was successfully turning the entire high society community of Atlanta against a ghost, solidifying her false narrative to ensure no one would ever question the sudden shift in corporate power. Reginald stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on his wife and her shoulder. He gently guided Vivian a half step back, taking control of the microphone with the commanding presence of a ruthless corporate chairman. "We will not let the greed of one disturbed woman destroy the empire my father built." Reginald boomed, his deep voice commanding absolute attention from the wealthy crowd. Julian loved this company with his entire soul. He understood that Sterling Logistics was more than just a massive transportation network. It is a vital pillar of the global supply chain, a testament to what our community can achieve through relentless dedication and visionary leadership. We refuse to let his tragic, untimely passing mark the end of our great family legacy. Instead, we are using his brilliant memory as the ultimate catalyst for our unprecedented future growth. Reginald swept his gaze across the front row of elite investors, directly addressing the men and women whose capital would soon be legally funneled straight into a ruthless underground weapons syndicate. "Tonight we honor Julian by pushing his greatest dream forward," Reginald declared proudly. "Tonight we officially transition Sterling Logistics into a publicly traded powerhouse. And to lead us into this incredibly lucrative new era, we are appointing a man who possesses the exact same fierce dedication and brilliant financial mind as my late son. A man who has stood by this family through our absolute darkest days. It is my profound honor to introduce the new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Logistics, my son-in-law Terrence." The grand ballroom absolutely erupted into thunderous applause. Investors stood to their feet, clapping enthusiastically for the very man who had slipped a deadly neurotoxin into his own brother-in-law drink. Terrence walked out from the velvet wings of the stage, buttoning his custom-tailored suit jacket, with a look of extreme arrogance disguised as profound humility. He embraced Reginald warmly, patting the older man on the back, then leaned over to kiss Vivian respectfully on the cheek. It was a sickeningly sweet display of false family unity. Terrence stepped up to the mahogany podium, waiting patiently for the massive applause to die down before he finally spoke. "I am deeply humbled by the immense trust this family has placed in my hands tonight." Terrence began, his voice projecting smooth, calculated confidence. "Julian was not just my brother-in-law, he was my mentor and my closest friend. Stepping into his shoes is an incredibly daunting task, but I promise every single investor in this room that I will protect your capital with my very life." He flashed a brilliant, completely fake smile at the audience. "We are standing on this precipice of international greatness. The initial public offering we are launching tonight will raise $500 million in immediate capital. We are expanding our trucking routes, dominating the coastal shipping ports, and ensuring that Sterling Logistics remains the absolute apex predator of the global transportation market." The crowd cheered again, completely mesmerized by the promise of exponential financial returns. They were utterly blind to the fact that their investment money was going to actively fund violent cartel operations across the international border. From my hidden vantage point, inside the audio-visual control room, I watched Jada strut proudly onto the stage. She wore a glittering diamond necklace and a stunning form-fitting emerald gown that dragged elegantly across the polished floorboards. Jada carried a heavy black leather binder pressed tightly against her chest. She walked directly over to the podium, offering her husband a blindingly bright smile as she gently placed the binder onto the wooden surface. That sleek leather binder contained the official initial public offering documents. Those specific documents were the exact undeniable legal mechanisms required to merge the cartel shell companies permanently into the Sterling Logistics public framework. The moment Terrence signed his name on the dotted line, the $50 million of laundered weapons money would become entirely legitimate, and the syndicate would gain unrestricted access to the public stock exchange. My heart hammered aggressively against my ribs as Terrence proudly opened the leather binder. He smoothed his hand flat over the crisp white pages, ensuring the documents were perfectly aligned for the cameras. a professional photographer, stepped up to the edge of the main stage, raising a heavy camera to capture the historic corporate milestone. The bright flashes reflected sharply off the crystal chandeliers overhead. Terence reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a heavy gold-plated fountain pen. He held it up slightly, allowing the elite crowd to witness the exact moment he officially seized total control of Julian Empire. This was the moment we had painstakingly planned for. I pulled my burner phone from my dark pocket, staring intensely at the illuminated screen. A single encrypted text message arrived from Elijah, confirming the federal tactical teams were fully positioned in the shadows outside the hotel. The message was concise and absolutely clear. "We are holding the perimeter. Execute the lockdown on the signature." I looked back through the soundproof glass window. Terence lowered his head, positioning the gold fountain pen directly over the signature line of the massive financial contract. The wealthy crowd leaned forward collectively, holding their breath in pure anticipation of the monumental corporate launch. Terence pressed the sharp golden nib of the pen firmly against the crisp white paper. The trap sprang immediately. I slammed my hand down hard onto the master electronic security panel on the control console. A loud, heavy electronic click echoed simultaneously across the entire grand ballroom as every single automated deadbolt on the exit doors slammed completely shut. The heavy brass handles locked, instantly sealing hundreds of elite guests securely inside the lavish venue. Outside the grand ballroom, Elijah and his highly trained federal tactical unit quietly surrounded the perimeter, blocking all the service corridors and emergency fire escapes with heavily armed agents. Inside the ballroom, the sudden aggressive sound of the massive doors locking simultaneously sent a shockwave of confusion through the wealthy crowd. The string quartet froze. The investors stopped clapping. The entire room fell completely, chillingly, dead silent. Terence froze with his pen hovering over the document, his arrogant smile vanishing as he looked toward the locked exit doors. Vivian gripped the wooden podium, her eyes darting nervously around the silent, trapped room. The heavy air inside the grand ballroom grew incredibly thick with an unspoken, paralyzing dread. Confused politicians exchanged visibly panicked glances, while wealthy socialites tightly clutched their diamond necklaces in sheer terror. Absolutely nobody could enter the massive venue, and absolutely nobody could leave it. The truly deadly corporate game was absolutely and finally over right now. The heavy electronic click of the automated locks effectively severed the grand ballroom from the rest of the world. I stood inside the audio-visual control room for one final second, staring through the glass at the bewildered faces of the Atlanta elite. It was time I reached up and pulled the harsh pins from my dark hair, letting it fall freely over my shoulders in thick natural waves. I unbuttoned the stiff, uncomfortable catering shirt with rapid, deliberate movements. I let the white fabric drop to the floor, followed quickly by the cheap black trousers and the restrictive catering apron. Underneath the humiliating disguise, I wore a stunning, commanding floor-length red dress. The vibrant crimson silk hugged my figure perfectly, a glaring, undeniable symbol of absolute power and fierce defiance. Was no longer the invisible servant pouring champagne. I was no longer the terrified widow running blindly through the dark industrial district. I was the executioner, and I had come to collect. I gripped a small, sophisticated remote control in my right hand, securing my grip on the device that would trigger the digital slaughter. I unlocked the heavy deadbolt of the control room door and slipped back into the dim service corridor. I bypassed the panicked catering staff, who were frantically trying to understand why the kitchen access doors had suddenly locked tight. I walked with absolute purpose toward the main entrance at the rear of the grand ballroom. I pushed the heavy oak doors open just wide enough to slip inside the opulent space. The luxurious room was currently buzzing with anxious, frantic murmurs. Politicians tapped their mobile phones in sheer frustration, realizing that the cellular signals inside the ballroom had been completely jammed by the federal tactical teams positioned outside the reinforced walls. I stepped squarely into the center aisle. My red dress commanded immediate visual attention against the sea of black tuxedos and dark mourning gowns. The sharp rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed loudly against the polished marble floor, cutting directly through the rising panic of the wealthy crowd. A prominent real estate investor in the back row turned his head to look at me. His eyes widened in absolute shock. He dropped his expensive crystal champagne flute. The glass shattered violently against the marble, sending sharp shards scattering across the aisle. The sudden aggressive noise drew the attention of the surrounding socialites. They turned their perfectly contoured faces toward me. The murmurs instantly transformed into loud, terrified gasps. Whispers spread across the vast room like a raging wildfire. "It is her!" a wealthy woman hissed to her husband, aggressively clutching his arm. "It is the fugitive wife, the woman who murdered the chief executive officer." The terrifying wave of recognition traveled swiftly up the center aisle. The elite crowd parted frantically, scrambling to get out of my direct path. They looked at me as if I were holding a loaded weapon, completely terrified of the working-class girl from the South Side. I kept my chin perfectly leveled, my gaze locked dead ahead on the main stage. I walked with the unyielding, ruthless confidence of a woman who held their entire financial futures in the palm of her hand. On the brightly lit stage, Vivian Sterling finally registered the sudden commotion rippling through her captive audience. She narrowed her eyes, peering past the blinding glare of the spotlights. When she saw my vibrant red dress advancing down the main aisle, the false mask of a grieving mother instantly melted away. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Security!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with violent, uncontrolled panic. "Arrest that woman immediately. She is a dangerous fugitive. She murdered my son. Grab her right now." Several heavy-set private security guards posted near the front of the stage stepped forward, reaching inside their tailored jackets. I did not flinch. I did not break my steady, measured stride. I simply raised my right hand high into the air, presenting the small black remote control for everyone to see. "Stand down," I commanded, my voice projecting with icy, undeniable authority that stopped the guards dead in their tracks. "Nobody touches me." Vivian grabbed the mahogany podium, her knuckles turning bone white as she leaned forward aggressively. "How dare you show your face here, Camille?" Vivian screamed into the microphone, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent, trapped ballroom. "You are completely finished. You have absolutely nothing. You are a pathetic, impoverished nobody who tried to steal our legacy. You are going to rot in a federal prison for the rest of your miserable life." I reached the very front of the center aisle, stopping just a few feet away from the edge of the elevated stage. I looked directly up at the woman who had tormented me, judged my background, and ruthlessly orchestrated the attempted murder of her own son. "You said I was your problem, Vivian," I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the massive, breathless room. "Now I am your worst nightmare." I pressed my thumb down hard on the remote activation button. The heavy digital command transmitted instantly to the audio-visual control room above. The massive light-emitting diode screens spanning the entire back wall of the stage suddenly flickered. The pristine golden logo of Sterling Logistics vanished entirely. In its place, crisp, high-definition security footage filled the enormous screens. The video was time-stamped from 2 nights ago, displaying the lavish interior of the Sterling family study. The entire ballroom gasped simultaneously as the moving image of Julian appeared on the screen, looking perfectly healthy, standing near a heavy oak bookshelf. Terrence was clearly visible in the foreground, pouring 2 glasses of aged bourbon from a crystal decanter. The wealthy audience watched in absolute horrified silence as the digital Terrence quickly checked over his shoulder. The camera captured the exact, undeniable moment. Terrence pulled a small, dark vial from his suit pocket. He swiftly emptied the deadly neurotoxin directly into Julian's drink. The crowd watched as Terrence handed the poisoned glass to his brother-in-law. They watched Julian take a sip. They watched my husband collapse violently onto the Persian rug, his body instantly paralyzed by the toxic chemical agent. "No!" Jada screamed, her voice tearing through the horrified silence of the ballroom. She lunged forward, waving her arms frantically at the massive screens. "Turn it off. It is fake. It is artificial intelligence. She is manipulating the video." The crowd began to shout in pure outrage. prominent investors stared at Terrence, their faces contorted in absolute revulsion and sheer panic. The man they were just applauding as their visionary new leader was currently being broadcast, committing a brutal, calculated attempted murder. Terrence stumbled backward on the stage, the gold-plated fountain pen dropping from his trembling fingers. The pen clattered loudly against the wooden floorboards, rolling away from the fraudulent initial public offering documents he had been desperate to sign. But the digital execution was not over. I pressed the remote button a second time. The horrifying video of the poisoning shrank to the left side of the massive screens. On the right side, highly classified offshore banking ledgers suddenly materialized in blazing, undeniable clarity. The spreadsheets detailed the exact movement of $50 million. The digital logs displayed the stolen capital flowing rapidly from the Sterling Logistics operational accounts directly into known blacklisted cartel shell companies located in the Cayman Islands. Every single illegal transaction was highlighted in bright red ink for the entire room to witness. At the bottom of the projected financial documents, two massive legally binding authorization signatures were displayed in incredibly high resolution. The signatures belonged explicitly to Reginald Sterling and Jada Sterling. The undeniable proof of international money laundering was now fully exposed to every major corporate investor, state, senator, and wealthy socialite in Atlanta. "You are not a prestigious business family," I declared, shouting over the rising, deafening clamor of the shocked audience. "You are a corrupt, violent criminal syndicate. You used this massive transportation empire to wash dirty weapons money for a ruthless cartel. And when Julian discovered your massive corporate fraud, you tried to brutally silence him permanently to protect your stolen wealth." The grand ballroom completely erupted into absolute terrifying chaos. Wealthy investors screamed in pure fury, realizing their massive financial portfolios were deeply tied to a violent international cartel. Politicians desperately shoved each other frantically, attempting to reach the locked exit doors to escape the catastrophic public scandal. Several outraged board members rushed toward the edge of the stage, shouting aggressive, furious threats directly at Reginald. Vivian collapsed to her knees on the stage, her hands clutching her head as her perfect, pristine high society empire violently burned to the ground. The ultimate destruction of the Sterling family was finally happening tonight, and they could absolutely not stop it from completely running its ruthless course right here and right now before everyone present. The deafening roar of the outraged crowd threatened to shatter the crystal chandeliers hanging above us. Jada scrambled across the wooden stage, her emerald gown catching on the heavy microphone cord. She snatched the microphone from the mahogany podium, her hands shaking violently. "You are all being lied to," Jada screamed into the microphone, her shrill voice slicing through the aggressive shouts of the angry corporate investors. "That video is completely fake. It is artificial intelligence. It is a highly edited deep fake designed to destroy our great family. Camille is a desperate, delusional widow trying to steal our legacy." The elite investors did not stop shouting. Jada gripped the microphone tighter, her eyes wide with unadulterated panic. "Look at the digital artifacts on the screen," she pleaded desperately, pointing a trembling finger at the high-definition footage of the poisoning. She hired a professional hacker to manufacture this entire scenario. She wants to ruin the initial public offering because she knows she gets nothing from the corporate trust. My father is an honest man. Terrence is an honest man. You cannot believe this fabricated garbage over the established reputation of the Sterling family. You all know us perfectly well." Terrence suddenly lunged forward, his pale face twisted into a mask of pure violent rage. He pointed a long, accusing finger directly at my face. "You are a cold-blooded murderer," Camille Terrence roared over the chaotic noise of the trapped audience. "You disconnected the life support machines and dragged his dying body out of the hospital. You killed my brother-in-law to extort this family, and now you are projecting these disgusting lies to cover up your federal crimes. I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life rotting in a federal maximum security prison." I stood my ground, my red silk dress flowing around my ankles. I did not flinch as Terrence continued his aggressive, desperate tirade. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage, his eyes burning with lethal intent. "Security, grab her right now," Terrence shouted, but the private guards remained frozen, completely unsure of how to proceed amidst the massive financial scandal unfolding on the giant screens. "You are totally insane," Terrence spat, his chest heaving with exertion. "You brutally killed him. We all know you killed him." "Julian is dead," Jada shrieked into the microphone. "Julian is completely dead." Her piercing shriek echoed endlessly across the massive locked ballroom. The wealthy crowd fell into a sudden tense silence, digesting the sheer magnitude of her horrifying claim. Jada stood on the stage panting heavily, believing she had finally regained control of the chaotic narrative. She looked down at me with a triumphant, malicious glare. But her victory lasted only a fraction of a second. A massive, tremendous, echoing crash suddenly reverberated from the very back of the grand ballroom. The heavy, reinforced mahogany doors at the main entrance were thrown violently open, slamming aggressively against the surrounding polished marble walls. The violent sound was like a gunshot in the dead silent room. Every single head in the entire venue snapped toward the back entrance simultaneously. The federal tactical agents holding the exterior perimeter had unlocked the primary doors, stepping aside to clear the main pathway. The bright lights from the lobby spilled into the dim ballroom, casting a long, commanding shadow down the center aisle. The wealthy crowd gasped in absolute unfiltered shock. The sea of black tuxedos and designer evening gowns began to part, rapidly separating like the Red Sea to make way for the impossible figure slowly approaching. Julian Sterling walked into the massive grand ballroom. He moved with the slow, deliberate, and undeniably lethal grace of a powerful resurrected king. He wore a flawless, custom-tailored black suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His pristine white shirt and dark silk tie projected an aura of absolute terrifying authority. The lingering weakness from the deadly neurotoxin was completely invisible. He walked down the center aisle with a perfectly straight spine, his polished leather shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. His dark eyes were locked entirely on the main stage, burning with a cold, unyielding, righteous fury. The reaction from the Atlanta elite was instantaneous and utterly explosive. The crowd went absolutely wild. People shrieked in genuine terror and sheer disbelief. A prominent state senator standing near the aisle took a stumbling step backward, his jaw dropping wide open. A wealthy socialite in the third row let out a high-pitched scream. The expensive crystal champagne glass she was holding slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering into a dozen sharp pieces. The sound of breaking glass echoed throughout the room, followed rapidly by the sounds of more dropped glasses and panicked whispers. "It is a ghost," one investor shouted, grabbing his chest in pure shock. "He is alive," another wealthy woman screamed, pointing frantically at my husband. Julian ignored the surrounding chaos entirely. He walked past the terrified politicians and the stunned corporate executives without breaking his intense singular focus. He reached the front of the center aisle and stood right beside me. He reached out and gently took my hand, intertwining his warm fingers with mine. I felt a massive surge of relief and pride wash over me. We stood together, presenting a united, unbreakable front against the corrupt, trembling family. On the elevated stage, the horrifying reality of Julian's undeniable physical presence struck the Sterling family like a catastrophic physical blow. Vivian collapsed entirely. Her knees hit the hard wooden floorboards with a heavy, ungraceful thud. She let out a strangled, pathetic gasp, her hands flying up to clutch her chest as if her heart was giving out. The elegant, commanding matriarch of Atlanta society was instantly reduced to a trembling, broken shell of a woman. She stared down at her resurrected son with wide, terrified eyes, completely unable to process the absolute failure of her sinister, calculated murder plot. Reginald staggered backward, losing his footing on the polished stage. He bumped violently into the heavy mahogany podium, very nearly knocking it over. The powerful, ruthless chairman of the board looked like a terrified child. His face was completely drained of color, his skin turning a sickly pale shade of gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely no words came out. His massive criminal empire, built on decades of lies and cartel money, was evaporating right before his very eyes. The man he had callously left to die on a cold hospital bed had returned to destroy him. Jada suddenly dropped the microphone. It hit the stage with a loud, aggressive feedback screech that made the wealthy audience wince. She backed away from the edge of the stage, shaking her head in frantic, rapid denial. No, 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 she muttered repeatedly, her hands covering her face in pure horror. This cannot be happening. You are supposed to be gone. Her glamorous facade was completely shattered. She realized instantly that the offshore bank ledgers displayed on the massive screen behind her would send her directly to a federal prison. Her luxurious, pampered lifestyle was officially and permanently over tonight. But Terence was the most terrified of them all. He stood frozen in the center of the stage, turning a ghostly, impossible shade of pale. He looked at the giant screen projecting his exact crime, then looked down at the man he had personally poisoned. Terence slowly reached into his suit jacket, his hand shaking violently, and dropped his heavy gold-plated fountain pen. It hit the floorboards and rolled harmlessly away. The brilliant financial executive realized his cartel handlers were going to execute him the moment they saw this broadcast. He had utterly failed the ruthless underground weapons syndicate. Julian stepped forward, gently releasing my hand. He walked up the short staircase leading to the main stage, his presence commanding total absolute silence from the panicked crowd. The wealthy investors stopped shouting. The politicians stopped murmuring. The entire grand ballroom held its collective breath, waiting for the resurrected chief executive officer to speak. Julian approached the heavy mahogany podium, kicking Terence's discarded gold pen out of his path. He gripped the edges of the heavy wooden stand, looking directly into the terrified, defeated eyes of his corrupt brother-in-law. The silence in the massive room was incredibly dense. Julian leaned into the microphone, his deep, resonant voice booming across the dead-silent room with absolute, terrifying clarity. "I am not dead," Terence Julian declared, his words striking like heavy, undeniable blows against the corrupt family. He looked down at Vivian, who was still kneeling and weeping on the floor, then over at Reginald, who was shivering in the corner. Julian turned his piercing, unyielding gaze back to the man who had tried to brutally end his life. "But your future is..." The final brutal truth echoed endlessly through the grand ballroom, signaling their absolute and complete total destruction. The sheer weight of Julian's words finally shattered Terence's frozen state of shock. The desperate, cornered financial executive realized that his meticulously crafted billionaire fantasy had just violently collided with absolute ruin. The massive screens behind the stage were still proudly displaying the undeniable proof of his international money laundering and attempted murder. Terence knew that the ruthless underground weapons syndicate was watching this exact broadcast. He knew the cartel would not wait for the justice system to punish his catastrophic failure. Pure, unadulterated panic completely took over his senses. Terence abruptly spun around on the polished wooden stage. He abandoned his terrified wife and his corrupt in-laws without a single second of hesitation. He sprinted frantically toward the heavy velvet curtains concealing the backstage exit, desperately hoping to slip into the dark service corridors and disappear into the Atlanta night. But the highly coordinated federal trap had already snapped entirely shut. The heavy brass doors surrounding the grand ballroom suddenly burst wide open with a massive, echoing crash. Dozens of heavily armed Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical agents flooded into the opulent space. They wore dark tactical gear, their protective vests boldly displaying the federal insignia. Elijah led the aggressive charge down the center aisle, his service weapon drawn and his eyes locked directly on the stage. "Nobody moves," Elijah roared, his commanding voice instantly silencing the remaining shrieks of the panicked elite crowd. "Secure the perimeter and block every single exit." Two federal agents intercepted Terence, just as his shaking hands grasped the heavy backstage curtain. They tackled the arrogant executive violently to the hard floorboards. The sickening crunch of Terence's custom-tailored suit hitting the polished wood echoed loudly. He struggled pathetically, thrashing his legs and screaming threats, but the agents easily pinned his arms behind his back. The steel handcuffs clicked aggressively around his wrists, neutralizing his escape attempt. Julian did not even blink as his murderous brother-in-law was wrestled into federal custody. He slowly turned his intense, burning gaze away from Terence and focused entirely on the man cowering beside the mahogany podium. Reginald Sterling, the formerly untouchable chairman of the board, was currently shaking uncontrollably. The wealthy investors in the front row, the very people Reginald had just tried to swindle out of $500 million, were watching him with absolute unmasked disgust. Julian stepped purposefully toward his trembling father. You built your entire life on the concept of maintaining absolute control and projecting a flawless public image, Julian stated, his voice ringing with cold, lethal precision. You sacrificed your own flesh and blood to protect a corrupt corporate reputation. You allowed my brother-in-law to poison me, and then you callously left me to die in a sterile hospital room so you could steal my empire and wash dirty money for a violent international cartel. Reginald raised his hands defensively, his face slick with sweat. Julian, please, my son. Reginald stammered, his voice reduced to a pathetic whisper. We had to comply with their demands. I was only trying to protect the company. You destroyed the company, Julian countered fiercely, stepping directly into his father's personal space. And you completely destroyed this family. I am standing before every major corporate investor, every state senator, and every prominent socialite in the city of Atlanta today. I am officially stripping you of your title. I am seizing absolute control of Sterling Logistics, effective immediately. You are no longer a respected business leader in this community. You are just a pathetic, greedy old man going to a federal prison. Reginald slumped forward, leaning heavily against the podium, as the absolute reality of his complete social and financial destruction crashed down upon him. The elite audience whispered furiously, abandoning the man they had worshipped. While Julian dismantled his father's corrupt legacy, I walked confidently up the short staircase and stepped onto the main stage. My vibrant red dress flowed elegantly around my ankles as I approached the trembling, horrified figure of Jada. She was currently backed into the far corner of the stage, clutching her glittering diamond necklace, as if the expensive jewelry could somehow protect her from the massive federal raid happening right before her eyes. I stopped just a few feet away, crossing my arms. Hello, Jada. I greeted her smoothly, ensuring my voice carried enough volume to hear. That is a truly stunning emerald designer dress you are wearing tonight. Jada glared at me. Her eyes, red and puffy from crying, completely ruined her flawless, expensive makeup. You ruined my life, you working-class trash, Jada hissed. You hacked my phone. You stole my corporate data. I laughed softly, shaking my head at her sheer arrogance. You clearly have not checked your mobile banking application recently, Jada, I replied. You called me from Paris and bragged about freezing all my joint accounts. Well, I have a sudden, devastating update for you. I handed the encrypted flash drive to the federal authorities this morning. The government has officially seized every single offshore and domestic bank account bearing your authorized signature. Jada's mouth dropped open in pure, unadulterated horror. She looked wildly toward Terrence, who was currently being dragged to his feet by the federal agents. The government has completely frozen your entire financial portfolio under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, I explained. Your luxury vehicles are currently being impounded. Your massive mansion in Buckhead is being seized as a criminal asset. Your expensive credit cards are completely worthless plastic. You are officially penniless, Jada. Jada let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She dropped to her knees, tearing at her beautifully styled hair as the monumental weight of her sudden aggressive poverty completely crushed her arrogant spirit. She realized she was no longer the pampered princess of the Atlanta elite. She was a broke, disgraced criminal accomplice. Elijah marched onto the stage, producing 2 sets of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. He approached Reginald first, firmly gripping the older man's wrists and securing them tightly behind his back. Reginald Sterling, you are under arrest for international money laundering, massive corporate fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder, Elijah announced loudly, reciting the federal Miranda rights as he shoved the former chairman toward the waiting agents. Another agent pulled the screaming, thrashing Jada to her feet, violently clicking the cold handcuffs around her wrists. Jada sobbed uncontrollably, begging the elite crowd for help, but the wealthy socialites simply turned their heads away in pure disgust. Nobody wanted to be associated with a penniless federal criminal. The doors at the back of the ballroom swung open again, but this time it was not the authorities entering. The local press, who had originally been invited to cover the glamorous initial public offering, suddenly rushed the main floor. The journalists pushed past the security perimeter, raising their heavy cameras and flashing bright, blinding lights. The media captured the dramatic takedown. The supposedly perfect Sterling family was paraded out of the hotel like common street thugs. As the agents hauled her corrupt husband and malicious daughter away, Vivian remained kneeling on the hard, wooden floorboards. The once powerful, haughty matriarch looked completely shattered. Her expensive black morning gown was wrinkled and dirty. Her perfect posture had collapsed entirely. She looked up at Julian, tears streaming down her face in a desperate, final attempt to manipulate his emotions. "Julian, please," Vivian begged, reaching out a trembling hand to grasp his suit jacket. "Please, my beautiful boy. You have to stop them from taking your father. You have to tell the federal agents this is a mistake. I am your mother, Julian. I gave you life. I raised you to be a king. You cannot let them do this to our great family. I am begging you for mercy." Julian stood perfectly still, looking down at the weeping, pathetic woman clutching his clothes. His dark eyes held absolutely zero warmth. He did not see the mother who had raised him. He only saw the ruthless, greedy monster who had authorized his murder to protect a cartel money laundering operation. He gently but firmly pulled his suit jacket away from her desperate, trembling grasp. He took a deliberate step backward, distancing himself completely from her toxic, manipulative presence. "You left me to die," Julian stated, his voice cold, steady, and utterly devoid of any forgiveness or mercy. "You chose your country club reputation and your dirty cartel money over my very life. You are not my mother anymore." Vivian let out a devastated, soul-crushing wail as two federal agents grabbed her arms, hauling her roughly to her feet. She sobbed and screamed his name as they dragged her away, but Julian did not look back. He turned his face away from his broken family, reaching out to take my hand once again. The complete and total destruction of the elite Sterling family was absolutely final today, securing our future entirely, bringing us pure, absolute peace. The morning sun rose over Atlanta, illuminating a city completely consumed by the most explosive corporate scandal in its entire documented history. The aggressive news cycle absolutely erupted before the dawn even broke. Every major television network, prominent financial newspaper, and digital media outlet across the country ran continuous, breaking coverage of the shocking Sterling family downfall. The dramatic high-definition footage of the massive Federal Bureau of Investigation raid at the luxurious Legacy Hotel played on a relentless, inescapable loop on every channel. The pristine billionaire facade of the untouchable Sterling empire had been violently ripped away for the whole world to witness, exposing the rotting, violent criminal core operating underneath their designer suits and country club memberships. Terrence was aggressively processed through the rigid federal justice system before the sun even hit the horizon. The undeniable digital evidence I had meticulously extracted from the corporate shadow servers proved utterly fatal to his desperate defense strategy. Facing a towering mountain of offshore bank ledgers, intercepted cartel communications, and the crystal-clear security video of his attempted murder, his highly expensive defense attorneys immediately advised him to surrender completely. Terrence pleaded guilty to international money laundering, massive corporate fraud, and the attempted assassination of a chief executive officer. The seasoned federal judge showed absolutely zero mercy during the sentencing hearing, handing him a brutal, non-negotiable sentence of 25 consecutive years in a maximum security penitentiary. The arrogant, previously untouchable financial executive was permanently reduced to a nameless inmate number, aggressively stripped of his tailored Italian suits and his vast stolen wealth. He would spend the best decades of his life locked inside a tiny concrete cell, constantly looking over his shoulder in pure terror, knowing the betrayed cartel syndicate was still actively hunting him behind bars. Reginald Sterling met a similarly devastating and highly publicized fate. The formidable chairman of the corporate board, the ruthless man who had callously prioritized his precious country club reputation over his own son's physical life, was brutally dismantled by the relentless federal prosecutors. Reginald was strictly sentenced to 15 harsh years in federal prison for his direct leadership role in facilitating the massive cartel money laundering operation. He lost his absolute freedom, his vast personal fortune, and his deeply cherished public standing in a matter of a few short, catastrophic days. The mighty patriarch was permanently destroyed by his own uncontrollable toxic greed. But perhaps the most satisfying poetic karmic retribution belonged exclusively to my malicious sister-in-law, Jada. Her entire existence had been built entirely on an aggressive, suffocating sense of unearned superiority and extreme entitlement. She had ruthlessly mocked my working-class background for years, wielding her massive family wealth like a blunt weapon against absolutely anyone she deemed socially inferior. Now the federal government had permanently seized every single asset attached to her name under the strict federal racketeering laws. Her lavish, sprawling Buckhead mansion was aggressively boarded up with thick plywood and quickly auctioned off by the government to compensate the defrauded corporate investors. Her fleet of luxury sports cars was swiftly towed away by federal agents right in front of the local media. Her extensive designer wardrobe, imported shoes, and expensive diamond jewelry were entirely confiscated as criminal evidence. Jada found herself completely abandoned by everyone she had ever known. Her criminal husband was locked inside a federal cage, and her wealthy socialite friends immediately blocked her phone number, absolutely terrified of catching the dark stain of her massive federal scandal. Utterly destitute, entirely alone, and completely humiliated on a national level, Jada was legally forced to relocate to the very South Side neighborhood she had always viciously ridiculed. She moved into a tiny, cramped, deeply run-down apartment complex featuring peeling yellow paint and aggressively rattling air conditioning units. The arrogant princess of the Atlanta elite was now forced to clip cheap grocery coupons and ride the crowded public city bus every single morning. She was permanently living the exact harsh, unforgiving working-class reality she used to cruelly mock me for surviving. The universe had delivered the ultimate perfect punishment for her incredible arrogance. Vivian Sterling faced a grueling emotional punishment far worse than any cold federal prison cell could ever offer her. She was not directly indicted in the cartel money laundering operation, simply because Reginald had meticulously kept her personal signature off the official fraudulent financial documents. However, her blatant, widely broadcast public complicity in attempting to viciously cover up the deliberate poisoning of her own son completely destroyed her comfortable life. The high society community of Atlanta, the incredibly elite world, Vivian had worshipped and sacrificed everything to dominate, turned their backs on her with stunning, highly vicious speed. She became a total, absolute social pariah overnight. The highly exclusive country club she had effectively ruled for decades immediately revoked her prestigious membership, barring her from ever stepping foot on their manicured green grounds again. The elite private church, where she had proudly sat in the very front pew, formally asked her to find another place of worship, flatly refusing to seat a woman who had willingly covered up a horrific attempted murder within her own home. Her wealthy, influential friends, the exact same women who had happily sipped expensive champagne and gossiped with her just days prior, looked right through her whenever she desperately tried to approach them in public. They treated her like a highly infectious, dangerous disease. Vivian was left entirely alone inside her sprawling, loudly echoing mansion, which was rapidly sliding into aggressive commercial bank foreclosure. The massive house was entirely stripped of its valuable artwork, imported rugs, and expensive antique furniture by aggressive corporate debt collectors. The pristine, sweeping gardens outside became totally overgrown and wildly neglected. Vivian constantly paced the empty, dark hallways completely by herself, her immense pride utterly shattered into a million unfixable, jagged pieces. The powerful matriarch who had callously abandoned her own child to protect a fake public image was forced to spend the rest of her lonely, miserable days living with the horrifying, inescapable reality that her own toxic, blinding vanity had completely destroyed her entire family legacy. While the deeply corrupt members of the Sterling family faced their absolute brutal destruction, Julian and I focused entirely on massive corporate reconstruction. We proudly returned to the sleek, towering glass headquarters of Sterling Logistics, not as terrified victims, but as powerful, conquering leaders. The massive transportation company was currently in a state of absolute, terrified chaos following the dramatic federal raid. But Julian stepped immediately into the main boardroom with commanding, unyielding, absolute authority. He ruthlessly purged the entire executive board, systematically firing every single corrupt director, complicit manager, and silent enabler who had blindly allowed Reginald and Terrence to successfully execute their massive cartel operation right under their noses. Julian completely cleaned the corporate house, removing the deep financial rot with surgical, highly unforgiving precision. We urgently needed to rebuild the fractured, bleeding transportation empire from the ground up, and we needed to do it on a solid, undeniably honest foundation. During a massive, highly publicized press conference held in the newly sanitized, bright corporate atrium, Julian officially resumed his rightful earned position as the chief executive officer. But he absolutely did not stand alone. He proudly announced a massive, sweeping corporate restructuring, directly addressing the deeply terrified company's stakeholders, nervous international investors, and the aggressive local media. He looked out at the extremely crowded room, his dark eyes filled with absolute pride and fierce, unbreakable loyalty, and confidently called my name. I stepped up to the wooden podium, wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored dark business suit. I was no longer the invisible, constantly underestimated working-class girl they tried to discard. Julian officially named me the new Chief Financial Officer of Sterling Logistics. I took the heavy microphone, looking directly at the blinding flashing cameras, and confidently outlined our aggressive, totally transparent strategy to recover the stolen capital and restore absolute financial integrity to the entire company. My extensive forensic accounting background, the exact professional skill set that Vivian had viciously mocked and constantly dismissed, was now the primary driving force saving their massive corporate legacy from absolute ruin. We worked grueling, incredibly long hours side by side, transforming the tainted, corrupted business into a shining beacon of ethical, powerful corporate practices. We successfully implemented rigorous financial security protocols to actively ensure that cartel money could never infiltrate our shipping routes again. We significantly raised the wages of our hardworking logistics staff. The corporate stock stabilized quickly, and our dedicated approach won back the crucial trust of our investors. We faced the absolute worst form of family betrayal and emerged completely victorious, permanently conquering their arrogant, toxic greed. 6 months after the federal trials officially concluded and the chaotic dust of our massive corporate restructuring finally settled, Julian and I stood peacefully together on the expansive wrap-around balcony of our brand-new home. We deliberately chose a secluded property far away from the toxic, judgmental atmosphere of the Buckhead Estates. Our new sanctuary was surrounded by tall, vibrant green trees and overlooked a quiet, sparkling lake that perfectly reflected the warm, golden hues of the setting Georgia sun. The frantic, life-threatening chaos of the hospital escape, the terrifying motel hideout, and the explosive ballroom confrontation felt like a distant nightmare. We had successfully fought a grueling, high-stakes war against his corrupt relatives and emerged completely victorious. I rested my forearms against the cool metal railing, taking a deep, cleansing breath of the fresh evening air. The heavy, suffocating weight of the Sterling family expectations was permanently gone. Julian stepped up closely behind me, wrapping his strong, warm arms securely around my waist. He rested his chin gently on my shoulder, looking out at the beautiful, tranquil water. The physical weakness from the deadly neurotoxin was entirely a thing of the past. He was completely healthy, vibrant, and radiating a profound sense of inner peace that he had never possessed while living under the dark, oppressive shadow of his father. "I owe you absolutely everything, Camille," Julian murmured softly, his deep voice filled with overwhelming gratitude and fierce, unbreakable love. "You did not just save my physical life in that cold hospital room. You completely saved my soul. You are without a single doubt the absolute strongest, most brilliant person I have ever known in my entire life." I turned my head slightly, pressing a soft, lingering kiss against his warm cheek. "We saved her, Julian," I replied, my voice steady and filled with absolute certainty. "You trusted me enough to guide us through the darkness. You stood by my side when the entire world was actively hunting us down." I leaned back against his solid chest, allowing my mind to deeply reflect on the incredible turbulent journey we had just survived. For years, the wealthy, arrogant elites of Atlanta had actively looked down on me. Vivian, Reginald, Jada, and their entire circle of snobbish, superficial friends had viciously mocked my working-class background. They had constantly sneered at my humble Southside roots, aggressively dismissing my forensic accounting career as a pathetic lower-class job. They genuinely believed that my lack of a prestigious country club pedigree made me inherently weak, foolish, and easily disposable. But they had made a catastrophic, fatal miscalculation. It was my relentless working-class grit that gave me the fierce courage to drag my paralyzed husband out of a heavily guarded medical facility. It was my practical, street-smart resourcefulness that allowed us to successfully evade highly trained cartel hitmen in a dingy industrial district diner. And it was my sharp, analytical intelligence that meticulously unraveled their highly complex, multi-million-dollar international money laundering syndicate. The very same financial skills they had cruelly laughed at were the exact weapons I used to completely dismantle their corrupt billionaire empire. They thought their vast wealth made them invincible gods. But my relentless pursuit of the truth proved that nobody is above the law. The glittering, expensive world of the Atlanta elite was nothing but a fragile house of cards built entirely on a foundation of lies, profound greed, and absolute moral bankruptcy. They had spent decades projecting an image of untouchable perfection, hosting lavish charity galas, and presenting themselves as the flawless pillars of the community. But beneath the designer dresses and the crystal chandeliers, their souls were rotting with corruption. Vivian thought her cutting insults and condescending remarks could keep me submissive and terrified. She assumed that my lack of generational wealth meant I lacked the basic human capacity to fight back. Reginald believed his immense corporate power and his expensive team of defense attorneys could easily crush a rogue accountant. Jada believed her sheer arrogance made her invincible. Terrence thought his cartel connections made him a god among men. But they were all catastrophically wrong. They severely underestimated the explosive, unyielding power of a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose. I had walked straight into their heavily guarded lion den, armed with nothing but a cheap burner phone and a highly encrypted flash drive, and I had successfully brought their entire criminal organization crashing violently down to the ground. I looked up at the darkening evening sky, watching the first bright stars begin to pierce through the fading twilight. The deep, lasting scars left by the Sterling family betrayal would always remain a part of our history, but they no longer possessed the power to cause us any pain. We had violently severed the toxic, poisonous roots of the past, making ample room to plant something entirely new, healthy and incredibly strong. Family is not defined by blood and class is not defined by bank accounts. True power lies in the truth, and the truth always comes to collect its debts. Julian gently turned me around, pulling me into a deep, passionate embrace. I rested my hands flat against his broad chest, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his strong, beating heart, perfectly matching the calm, quiet peace of my own. The nightmare was finally permanently over. We had a massive, thriving corporate empire to successfully run a beautiful, peaceful new home to fill with genuine love and a bright, unwritten future stretching out endlessly before us. We had walked through the absolute darkest fires of betrayal and emerged completely unburned, forged into something far stronger than steel. Have you ever had to expose a toxic family member's secret to protect yourself? How did you handle their fake masks falling off? Share your experiences in the comments below. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories about claiming your power.